ways do in what ways do international treaties and agreements adapt to address the global challenges? Actually, the international treaties, they try to answer to the global challenges with updates. We will see that there were several other protocols that were, for example, regarding the Treaty of Rome that instituted the International Criminal Court. This is a clear example. It has been, because it's only a treaty that we have commented a bit in the deep so far. And it's something that has been done through the last, at least for the last couple of centuries. It's the way is always the same. You sign a treaty, you see a new challenge coming up, and you try to update it. Second question. Armed conflicts and international law. How to avoid the lawlessness and protect the civilian. That's another, let's say, not difficult question. Is a difficult matter because the nation tried to put a regulation during the last century and a half to a regulation how to make war. And there was the two The Hague Convention, one in 1899, one in 1907. There were the Treaty of Geneva the Geneva Convention in 1864 that has been updated 3 times in 1906, 1929 and 1949. They were tried to give some regulation to the way to make wars even from the beginning, because, for example, the Hague Convention discipline how the way to declare war. So it will be the possibility to give a regulation and don't see cruel or unlawful or deprecable acts, even from the starting of the war. The result was just partially successful because there were, and this will go back to the same topics as before, there were 2 The Hague Convention and 4 updates of the Geneva Convention because there were new challenges, because what was written was not enough. But unfortunately, it's still been not enough because the convention were not enough to protect even the military. So the civilian is even more is a matter even more complicated. And this is bring us to the point. The international law is based on agreements. If a state will not sign an agreement, even if for what deprecable would be, for morally disgusting could be, not sign an agreement, they are free to do. Everything is like an arbitration. For example, the Japanese never signed before the Second World War the Geneva Convention and treated the occupied population and the prisoner of war in awful manners, with forced labor, with killing, indiscriminate killings, execution. In some cases, even they cannibalized the prisoner of war, something awful. There were lack of food, they kill and eat the prisoners, something that is terrible. So this is unfortunately the limit of the international law. And I want to stress this point because I see in general in your question and I think is understandable, that my perception, maybe you think, when you think about international law, you think about the national common law. Something that when you are a citizen of the state, there is a social organization, there are rules, and people feel compelled and obliged to follow the rules, unless they decide to become criminal or socially dangerous people. It's possible to stay outside of the law, but it's a strong decision. Unfortunately, and probably you make a parallel between international law and domestic law, thinking, ever perceived the international law like the domestic law. The reality is completely different, because for any type of tentative, there is not an international social order between the nations. This is the truth. We create it with the United Nations, and before that with the Society of Nations. But it is not fully successful, and is based on convention. If a state wants to be out of the social order, is allowed, and there is no possibility to impose to this state nothing except using weapons, making war, oblige it to comply. This is the only, unfortunately, it's true. And sometimes even the agreement could create on which the social order is based, between the social order between states, can create problems. Because if you think right now, for the Human Rights Commission, the chairman is Iran. That you want to, I totally agree with what one of the representative of the Iranian dissidents said, that the only good place for an Iranian for the Iranian government in the matter of human rights is to be on trial. But it's happened because the social order is between states is an agreement, and you have to matches all the different instances to find a way to allow everybody and to allow everybody to take part. In the normal domestic law, a convicted criminal cannot be the policeman. In the international order, because it's created based on agreement, it's happened. Then I have two questions from Alexandra Ilinitska. Alexandra, are you with us?
Yes, I hear.
Okay. I thank you for your three questions that are really very, very, very interesting. You make one question in regards the aspect of monism and dualism in the application of the law. And another interesting question that regarding the two conventions of the United Nations regarding waters and their connection. I think are very interesting matters, and I would like to answer to you, dedicating a couple of lessons to these matters, because I think will be something interesting. So I will not answer to this question right now, also because it will be a lesson itself. And the second question instead, can you elucidate the array of means available for resolving disputes in international law, ranging from diplomatic counsel to judicial mechanism and institutional process? Also, this will deserve a lesson, but I'll try to spend some words. Formally, we have already touched some of the means that can be used to resolve the international dispute that are the court. The International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. These are already two ways to resolve. In other situations, there are the diplomatic means. There can be to call in a conference, to find a negotiator between two parties, to also connecting what I told in regard to Mikita answer, to find an update give an update to previous treaties. One clear example of this is what is happening right now in between Guyana and Venezuela. Venezuela it really hit fuel again an old question regarding territorial claims of territory of Guyana, a claim that descends from the colonial time when Guyana was an English dominion, and it was actually a dominion, a claim that was made against England. There were signs that the war was on the route, and the president of Brazil tried to mediate, tried to organize a conference, tried to find an agreement between parties. This is the most, let's say in few words, is the most usual way. In this sense, in fact, in other cases, when there is evident violation of pact, situation, agreement, or human rights, there are the courts. Okay, let's go to the lesson for today. Today we speak about the states. We have mentioned a lot of time the word states, and the states as a subject of international law. I think it's time to define what is a state. Just like when we talk about domestic law, we will explain what is considered a human being or a company in commercial law. The concept of state can be defined in two ways: as a state as a community, or a state as an organization. The state as a community is a human community established in a certain territorial area and subjected to laws that kept them together. So we have three elements in the state as a community. We have, of course, a human community that should be the center, but is not of the concept of state, but it is until a certain point. Connected to a territorial area and subjected to the same law. So a human community who is not identified or enclosed or inhabiting the same area, and is not subjected to the same law, is not a state. It's the typical case of and we'll talk about it later. It's ethnic minority. For example, the Kurds who inhabited the south part of Turkey, the northern part of Iraq, the eastern part of Syria, and the western part of Iran, they are an ethnic minority, but they are not a state. Of course, in Iraq, there is a Kurd state that is part of the Iraq state, but this is a different matter. But in general, the Kurds are spread in 4 countries and subjected to 4 different system of laws. Then the state as an organization. A state is an organization, is the ensemble of all the government bodies that effectively exercise the governance action. This ensemble includes all the governance level of a state, from the national to the local levels. This government body take part in the formation of the international law, exercising the governance activity. Basically, another element in which we can define a state is a state as organization. It's a government divided in different levels that keep a territory together and exercise a government action. So is able to exercise the power on this territory. To make an example of this, that can be sound. Say it could be. It could be, for example, the Czechoslovakian state before the separation. Actually, UK what is the best example, because I was thinking about former Yugoslavia, because in this case there is, you can appreciate the difference between a state as a community, as a state organization, is Spain. In Spain, we have a community that is divided in, according for the Spanish, in different groups, because we have Castilian, you have the people from Catalonia, you have the Galician, you have the Basque. But they are all under the same law, under the same organization. This organization is divided in level from city to regional to national. They are all together and they all exercise a governing action. And this is technically a state, despite what are the ethnic community. In terms of what is, we have, so due to the definition of state, we have the community and the organization. From the point of view of the international law, is the state, the state that we mean is a state as an organization, because it's the latter that takes part in the creation of international law itself. The international law is, as we said before, is made by state through agreement, through treaties, even to international agreements between 2 states. To sign an agreement, you should have the possibility to exercise the governance of a territory, because otherwise you sign something that has no value, but not actual value, because when you sign an agreement, you promise something to the other state that signed the treaty with you, or the multiple states that signed something with you. If you don't, if you are not, if you do not exercise the, if you don't exercise the governance action, your promise is something that you cannot maintain. So the treaty is empty of any value, because the other, if they exercise their the governance action, they promise you something that they can maintain. For example, something very basically, all your citizens, I grant them the possibility to pay the taxes to me, and don't pay again the tax to you when they take their money from my territory to your territory. If you are not able to maintain this this promise, because you actually do not govern, you are not the governing entity of the territory. You don't control the taxes. I give you something to your or a benefit, and you don't give me anything to me. The state as an organization should match two conditions to be considered as a juristic person with the legal capacity in referral to international law. The effectivity of the capacity of ruling, and second, and then the independence and external sovereignty. Basically, what I was saying before, it is not important just to be an organization. It's important to exercise the effective governance on the territory. Second part, to be independent and to have an external sovereignty, because as I don't control my territory, if I don't have the capacity of governance and the capacity of ruling, in the same way, if I'm just a puppet, and I don't use this term by chance, but because we'll see what the puppet states in the concept of puppet states in the future in the lesson. Again, I'm not a subject. I cannot be a subject of international law, because I do not have the possibility to decide by myself if I can give execution or not to the treaty that I sign, to the promise I take. The effectivity of the capacity of ruling. The effectivity of the capacity of ruling, the first condition, suppose that the state as an organization exercise effectively its governance action over a state as a community. Therefore, the status of a juristic person cannot to be granted to exiled government and National Liberation Committee, the failed government that exists only on paper and don't have an effective authority on the territory, the insurgent government established by insurgent movements. Let's briefly check these three categories. The exiled government and the National Liberation Committee. The exiled government, the National Liberation Committee, basically they are not a state. Also because, going back for what we just said, they have no effective control and no capacity, the governance capacity on the territory. They can have portion of the territories under the control for what the portion of the territory that they claim as their own territory. The same matter is the exiled government, because they don't have a capacity of ruling. It's very interesting what's happened during the Second World War. Because, as you know, the Germans occupied between 1939 and 1940 a lot of countries and a lot of nations. In some way, and many of these governments moved their seat to London. They created an exiled government, and they create also some create liberation committee, and all of them created an armed force, a free armed force to keep fighting against the Germans. This happened to Poland, Norway, Belgium, Holland, France, the 5 major countries. It's interesting because almost all these countries were in a different position according to the international law. And Denmark, sorry, I missed Denmark. In Norway and Poland, a republic and a monarchy, they have both the government in exile in London. Technically, they were not able to express any governments on the territory they former control, but basically there was no local government over there. Actually, there was no local government on Poland. Poland have a strong liberation underground, the famous Polish underground army. They create a military force and basically make a continuation of the war. They were legally we can see that the situation of the Polish was one of the best according to the international law, because they don't control the territory, but they still have some function, and there was no other government, national governments on the ground. Even better was Holland, because the Queen and the government escaped in London, but until 1942, they were extended colonial territories on which the crown and the government keep exercise a governance action, and they still retain some, even after the majority of these colonies were occupied by the Japanese, because there was still some the Dutch West Indies, there were Dutch Guyana. So basically, Holland was still an effective state and effective government. Other interesting case was Norway, because in Norway, the king and legitimate government escaped from the country, and they established their base in London. Why this is a different case again? Because the Germans do not formally, they do not govern Norway formally, because they were in total control of the country, but they create a local government, appointing a gentleman named Quisling as a head of the state. And in this case, there was another local government, different so we have a difference between Norway and Poland. But also to this government, it was not possible to recognize any independence, any value as a state, because it was a puppet state. And we'll talk later more in detail about that. Other case was Belgium. In Belgium, the king stayed in the country, didn't left the country, the head of the king. And he was very criticized for that. He was taken prisoner by the Germans. The government escaped to England. The king signed the ceasefire with the Germans. So technically speaking, and Belgium still have some territories not occupied, because the colonies of Belgium in Africa were still free under control of the government in London. But the head of the country has signed the peace. So technically speaking, any member of the Belgian armed force who keep fighting, technically speaking, was doing something illegal. Very, very interesting situation. Other case where Denmark, not the king stay in the country, the government stay in place, and were kept in place until, I think, 1943, 1945, before to be substituted by another puppet government. And even this case, technical, and the armed force of Denmark after surrender were kept, well, technically were reduced to the minimum, but kept in their place. Again, a Danish soldier or a Danish volunteer will go to England to fight against the Germans, were doing something debatable from a certain point of view. They were not, of course, the king of Denmark and the government of Denmark was absolutely against the Germans, so never would complain home. But technically, there was another case. Other case again, France. France is very interesting because, according to some historians, that, in my opinion, don't go deep in the technicality of the law. It was considered a puppet state. In the reality, it acted like a puppet state, but it was not a puppet state, because the government of France was a legitimate government, like the one who was elected before the war. There was a change of government, a change of head of the state. There were some changes due to the fact that Germany fall in 1940. But at the end, it was the legitimate French state. The French Republic surrendered surrendered to the German in 1940, in May 1940, June 1940, sorry. And it is called the Vichy France because the capital was transferred to Paris, from Paris to Vichy, because Paris was occupied by was in the German occupation zone. But technically speaking, until it was dissolved by the German occupying his territory, it was the legitimate government of France. De Gaulle and the Free France, General Leclerc, all the others who fight for for the Free French armies. Technically, until the Vichy France was occupied by the Germans, they were rebels. Failed government. Failed government is a government who is not able to maintain, to execute a governance action on his territory. And he stay in place just because it's supported by other forces, by the international action, and so on. It's not the matter that the government had to escape, but the problem is that there is so much chaos, so much internal struggles, and so much internal conflicts, that the state was not able to exercise the full control of the territory. One typical case of this is Somalia. Somaliland is technically a failed state. There is a government, it receives aid, formally it has the army, but it doesn't control the territory. The territory are in the hand of the clans who do whatever they want. And the government is there just because the international community support it, take it alive, and is in the hope to restore what will be the national situation, a normal situation in a state. Last is the insurgent governments. The insurgent governments, or the government established by insurgent movements, and it's something quite common in our times. In many parts of the war. For example, if you think about Thailand or Myanmar, Myanmar has right now his own technical problem because they have a civil war between what you can say the military and we can say a parliamentary group that you want to get, that want the power, give it back to the civil institution and the people. But both in Myanmar and Thailand, there are a huge minority of other ethnicity, like for example the Karen, the Chinese, and this minority has organized their own army, their own local government, who exercise a governance action. Because in the district that was controlled by the
Mr. Fabrizio, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I need to say something. A little advertisement, because in our region right now an air alert. So who is safe right now, please stay here, and others you can hear our lesson later. Thank you.
Sorry, I do not understand. Can you repeat, please?
In our region in Kiev right now, an air alert.
Okay, perfect. I understand.
So you can continue right now. It's not a problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. No, guys, if you are, I suggest to take shelter if you are in this area, in the Kiev area. So the liberation movements, usually they have a governing action in the territory that they control, especially if they reach a good extent they control a good extent of territory. For example, there were the Moros, other example, the Moros rebel that are the Muslim labor in southern Philippines. They controlled the entire districts. Or going back in history, the Mexican rebels of Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata in the early 20th century. They control huge part of this territory. In this case, they exercise the governance action, but they were not recognized. They were not the government. So they cannot be subject of for international law, and they cannot have a judicial personality unless they win the revolution, they win the civil war, or they liberate the territory, and they became the legitimate government, kicking out the previous government. This is something happened for the Sandinistas movement in Nicaragua. And so and it's happened in Salvador, and it's happened in other situations. Talking about the national liberation movement, it's an interesting case. Is the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and the National Palestinian Authority. We speak a lot about this organization. We speak before regarding the Court of Justice and so on. But I think it's something that is in the news and something interesting to speak about, because it creates a very interesting case. The PLO in 1988 unilaterally declared the creation of the State of Palestine, even if at the time it was based in Tunis and it didn't have any effective authority on the territory and the community that they claimed. So we are the PLO and never control anything in Palestine. Also because this was created after the war of the first Arab-Israeli war in 1948, and it was created abroad. The base of the PLO was first Jordania, then Lebanon. Lebanon was invaded in the middle of the early 80s by the Israel, and there was an agreement in which the PLO was transferred to Tunis. Actually, I make a little error and I want a clarification. Technically speaking, the PLO was created inside Palestine because in after the war 1948 and until 1967, the 6 Days War, the West Bank was controlled by the Jordan kingdom, the Transjordanian kingdom, the king of Jordan, and the PLO was created in Jordan, in the Jordan territory, but still the kingdom of Jordan do not recognize the PLO as a legitimate government in this territory, because in 1948, after the war, the king of Jordania simply say the West Bank is mine. Never thought to create an independent state. So they were a kind of they were a liberation movement. In 1988, they were out of Palestine, out of the Middle East. They were in North Africa, and they decide to declare a state that was not recognized because it was not a state according to the international principle. They have no government, no control on the territory, and so on. Despite of this, some rulings produced around the world in the second part of the 80s regarding the PLO admitted a limited international law capacity of the national liberation movement. According to this ruling, this autodetermination of the people, this movement has a capacity to discuss matters related to the principle of autodetermination of the people with the territorial state that actually controlled the population or occupied the territory that this movement wanted to free. This discussion can be held in a situation of perfect equality between the territorial state and the liberation movement. Then we have a case where the courts, the tribunal, because we are talking about the ruling from the tribunal, go further than doctrine and law itself. The PLO, of course, have no authority on the territory. They have no governance, but there were some rulings from some cases in which they were involved. They say an important principle. It says, it's true, a liberation movement cannot be considered in a state according to the international law principle. It cannot dictate, it cannot match the states on equal ground, but it can able to discuss with the country that occupies its territory for the freedom of this territory. So there is a limited capacity. Because that is connected with the political reason of existence of the Liberation Front. On the contrary, no full subjectivity has been recognized to such movements, therefore excluding them from any immunity in regard to the civil or penal jurisdiction granted to the territorial states. What this means? It means that, for example, the PLO was able to deal with Israel, the state of Israel, on paritarian base in regarding all the matters that were connected with the governance and the assignment of territories inside the Palestinian territory and the territory occupied by Israel. But on the other side, even if you have this limited capacity, it's not a state. So, and everything is granted to a true state. For example, the immunity of an ambassador, where it cannot be recognized to the PLO members. So technically speaking, the PLO always at the time had representative in Italy, they have representative in Eastern Germany, in Russia, in Egypt, in all the states that they wanted to recognize. The PLO never have a representative in United States, for example, or I don't think they have even in England. I think they have in France. But these gentlemen were hosted in Italy, were hosted in Germany, were hosted in France, were hosted in Egypt or in Morocco to act as a diplomat, but it doesn't have the status of the diplomat. So if he committed a crime, he was under the jurisdiction of the local tribunal. He was not, doesn't have any immunity. His office can be searched by the police if there was a crime. It was the suspect of the crime. And also it was important because the PLO, technically speaking, at the time was still listed as a terroristic organization. In the past, it has been a terroristic organization. The the PLO was succeeded by the National Palestinian Authority. The National Palestinian Authority was created in 1994 with the Oslo Agreement. They gave this entity a limited territorial control over some parts of the Israeli-occupied Palestine. The National Palestine Authority was succeeded in 2007 by the Palestinian state, with de facto no substantial changes in regard to the territorial control. We have here, we talk about we have a problem with the Palestinian state, National Authority, National Palestinian Authority, and also with the Palestinian state. Now, since 2000, early 2000, it has been, this government has been established in the Israeli-occupied Palestine, because the Palestinian state now have a government, they have a parliament, they have police, they have even armed force, around, I think, 50,000 soldiers. But they have a governance authority, because they actually control they control some areas of the Israeli-controlled occupied Israeli-occupied territories. So they have a kind of effective governance action. They can exercise a governance action. But the key problem is that this authority and this governance action is shared with the Israeli government. It's a very interesting case in which we have the same territory and the same people, let's say, managed by two different governments. To make a clear example, if someone in the West Bank area committed thievery, it can be arrested by the National Palestinian Authority police. If he's suspected of the crime of terrorism, he's arrested by the Israeli police. In the current situation, the recognition of the National Palestinian Authority, also known as the Palestinian state, as a state with the full juristic personality, is still debatable. And this, I just explain you why. Because there is a problem with the conflict of authority. The argument against the full recognition of the National Palestinian Authority, Palestinian state, as a territorial state are the following. The National Palestinian Authority do not effectively have a full control over its territory, sharing it with the Israeli government, as just said. Other point are the form of the agreement. The agreement between the National Palestinian Authority and Israel have the shape of decolonization agreements from the past, more than a shape of agreements between full independent nations. This is a type of formality because, of course, there are agreements. The Oslo Treaty is already the base of one of the base agreements. Treaties are established by states. In this case, there was a form of typical of decolonization. The decolonization was a process in which the colonizer gradually give up their authority to the natives. In some cases was the transfer a kind of smooth. In other cases was something that create some problems. But it's naturally, it was a natural transformation. The agreement between Israel and the Palestinians in some form, remember this, because I give you one piece, then one piece, and a piece, but I will oversee and control and control what you are doing. This type of agreement, for example, outside the case of colonial decolonization, was the agreement that were established between Britain and Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. This was a process of decolonization. There was a process of, and there was also a conflict because the local government chose a path that was not welcomed by the British government at the beginning. So it does not be an easy path. Other elements that make debatable the fact that the Palestinian National Palestinian Authority is not a state is representative in the international organization. Because the National Palestinian Authority is still an observer at the United Nations, sorry, and it hasn't received yet a full member status. Other elements that is in the middle between the formality of the agreement and the representative that the Palestinians has in the international, in the United Nations, are the fact that the agreements between Israel and Palestine are not registered at the United Nations as all the other international agreements. I make a note. Let's say, imagine that Italy and Ukraine sign a treaty or something, taxation. We already have it, but let's say we have just signed a treaty for taxation. This treaty is registered at the United Nations. That is give full publicity to that, and they, let's say, what the case give the value of erga omnes for everybody. Everybody knows, and they say that there is this type of agreement. The agreement between Israel and the Palestinians are not registered, so it sounds like when a treaty is not registered at the United Nations, it sounds like a private matter between two states, and in some way is a conception from a state to another, exactly like for the decolonization. Because for the decolonization is not that, okay, in some cases there was colonial wars, and there was an agreement because at the end, one side lost the war or considered the war lost. For example, the French Indochina Wars and or the colonial wars of Portugal in Africa. But especially in case of it was a peaceful transfer of authority, it was the colonialists who grant something to the natives, even if the natives has a full right for that. Let's go to the other prerequisite, the independence and external sovereignty. The independence and external sovereignty suppose that a state as an organization has to base its independence and authority on its own constitution and constitutive documents, and not on the constitutive documents of another state. This is a link with the colonial, what you were saying before with the colonial agreement, in which there was someone who gave I give you your home. Again, to have a state to be independent and have external sovereignty, a state has to base its independence and its own authority on its own constitution and constitutive documents. So no one granted him anything. He's fully independent. He can decide by his own. Therefore, the juristic personality cannot be recognized to the state member of a federal state and the puppet government. So the first case, the state member of the federal state, we can say it's why you cannot give them the prerequisite of independence. Because they are the member of a federal state depends on the authority of someone else. The members of a federation, in some case, they are allowed to sign international agreement, but the authority to proceed in this way is granted to them by the federal government. These agreements are signed with entities of the same level and not with independent state. So I cannot be considered to have international sovereignty and to have judicial personality at the international in the international law matters. If I cannot decide, it's always a circle. I cannot decide by myself to sign or not sign what type of agreement. For example, to make a clear example, Emilia-Romagna, that is the region of Italy where I live, cannot sign an agreement with the Ukraine, because to sign an agreement such as that, it has to have a permission by the central Italian government, because the international affairs is something that is an exclusive matter of the national government. It of course sign an agreement for economical exchange with the Oblast of Kiev, with the Oblast of Lviv, with the Oblast of Odessa, but it's just between two entities that are at the same level. They both have the permission of the central state, and the agreement is limited to the matters that are delegated for each region, for each state, to the region, or for the level under the national state. So it's not only that, let's say, Lviv and Emilia-Romagna, they can sign, each of them have the permission from each national government. The limit of what they sign is dictated by the powers granted to each local authority by the national state. If they say, the national states say, okay, you can make an agreement on economics, exchanges, economic matter, and whatever, they can sign. If one of the states say, you can sign in tax matter, and the other say, no, you cannot, the agreement is not valid. There should be equal level of government, equal level of power, and equal, it should be the same level of delegation of power. We have talked about federation. let's say we are now speaking with region because it was I think more simple for you because Ukraine is a country with oblast. It is a kind of region. It's not two federal, not two federation. But we can say the same between Bavaria in Germany and Ohio and Iowa in the United States. They are both are true federal system because there is it is a territorial government for the state of Bavaria. Inside the German Federation, there is a state, there is a territorial government and the governor in the state of Ohio or Iowa or New York, United States. The principle is the same. They cannot, each of them, if they have to sign an agreement, they can do it, but they have to ask Washington, Berlin. They have the same power and they have to respect the law of both. We have a different type of aside where we always say we now speaking about federation. There's a different type of federation that is a confederation. We use generally this name in the same way, like synonymous. Federation, confederation is not exactly the same. In the confederation state, the confederation state represents a union of independent states and not a federation. From a theoretical point of view, the state member of a confederation retains its capacity to act independently from the confederation itself. The confederation is actually an intermediate step to reach the federative level. Very honestly, so we have something that is technically is difficult to find an example. In some ways, the European Union is a confederation. Because in the confederation, the state retains its own autonomy, but delegates some matter to some to the central government, to the confederation itself. The European Union is, I was talking recently about that. It's an hybrid in the sense that it's a mix between confederation, is more the confederation, less than a federation state. But this could work as was an example because Italy is totally independent, France is totally independent, Ukraine, when it join, it will remain totally independent, but in certain matter, tax, economy, I think in the future, of course, also defense, military defense, not yet. They delegate this power to the Commission, to the Parliament, and the Parliament is able to, in which the nation is represented, is able to make laws in this matter that have to be applied in the member state. So it's kind of more complex. Right now, the only federation still active is Switzerland, the confederation, sorry. Switzerland, at least the only one that makes me pop in my mind is confederation. In Switzerland, it's the cantons are very unique. Each of them has, because they are very different also. You think there are cantons with several 100,000 of people, maybe a million or close to a million, and there are cantons that have 10,000 people, 6,000 people. There are some matters that are managed directly by the government of the Confederation, like, for example, military defense. But, for example, taxation is different from, there is a national confederation level of taxes, and there is a local. And the local tax system are very different. You think about also the election. You think that in some parts of Switzerland, there are still the votes raising a hand in a public assembly. Of course, there are many cantons when you are talking about few meetings of a few hundred or a few thousand people, but it's still a reality. So it's a very complex. I tell you something that very curious detail. It's just historical curiosity. You know that in the United States there was a civil war, and the Southern states secede from the Federation, from the Union, and create the Confederate States. The principle, they create a Confederate State because one of the technical causes of the war, and actually I always recognize it, was not the matter of the slavery that was connected, but it was not. There was some interesting constitutional point. One point, it was the capacity of the national authority, the central state, to interfere in the matter of the single state. One of these cases, one of the matter was the slavery, but extracting from slavery, the constitutional point was that the Southern states do not recognize to the central government of the United States, of the Union, the right to interfere and dictate the laws to the single state that should be that the single state were forced to complain and to apply it. They secede, they create a confederation, they start a war. During the war, like in many cases, there was a shortage of troops, of recruits. Actually, still the Confederate Army was composed of regiments raised in each state. So there was not very few Confederate regiments. There were regiments from Georgia, regiments from Florida, and people there were recruited, trained, dressed, equipped, and sent and commanded by generals that were from that state. Then at a certain high level, there was a mixing, but they were this organization. At a certain point, the central government realized that there was a lack of troops. The state could not provide, and all the troops were volunteer. They were not provide enough troops and decided a general mobilization. It was a constitutional crisis because, and it has a kind of sense, because if you think that the state secede because they think that the Union tried to interfere in their action, and create a confederation that again interfere in their internal matter, ordering something like a general mobilization of the citizen to form national regiments and send troops to the front. It was necessary, but from a constitutional point of view, it was an interesting case and an interesting matter that to study. But actually, the Civil War is, I think that if you have the chance, and you're curious, I suggest to read something about the Civil War, because the Civil War was the first modern war, and so in aspect of military action, everything seen from the balloon to the submersible to the ironclads, the machine guns, the mines, everything was, or even the biological warfare, everything what happened later started there, was seen for the first time there. It was a long war, 5 years, almost 5 years. So it was a kind of change of tactics from the Napoleonic time to a new, to a modern warfare. It was very interesting also from the from the law point of view, because there was a lot of constitutional issues and that were the cause of the war. For example, you think that there was several cases regarding the secession, how the process of the secession from the Union was accomplished. Referendum with decision of the governor. It's a kind of interesting from the constitutional point of view. It's very interesting also for the matter that we touched before, that were the international treaties regarding how the civil population protection, the military rule, the rule wars of war, because the Hague Convention, not the First Geneva Convention, because it takes place during the Civil War, the same time. It was 1864. But the Hague Convention and the other following convention, the base on which they started to debate and find solution of the matter was based on a code issued in 1863 by the President of United States, Abraham Lincoln, who dictated the rules of war, how the civilians should be treated, how the prisoner of war should be treated, how the exchange of prisoners should be acted. And this, you think the greatest understanding, you can understand the greatness of a man, because even in a war that was going and it was hard, he was able to think about this matter and give modern solutions to that. Modern for the time, but there could be open to be a base for the future development of the time. I love a lot Abraham Lincoln, I have to tell you. Puppet states, because we say that we cannot be, states cannot be considered independent if a member of a federation is a puppet state. The puppet states are organizations created by the will of a state with the purpose of formally governing the territory under its military control, but belonging to another state. We mentioned earlier about the Quisling government in Norway. The case is very simple, and the Germans due to a second war, there was a proliferation of these cases during the Second World War, as we will see, because the German and the Japanese use this process a lot. The puppet states were not an unknown phenomenon in human history, with several of them created during the ages, like the Batavian Republic, created in 1795 by the First French Republic, or the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, created by Napoleon. To some extent, there was also the product of the Spalia fees and the introduction of the state of sovereignty based on the population who inhabit the territory rather than the royal families that governed it. we go back. If you think during the first lesson, I spoke about the Westphalian Treaty. The Westphalian Treaty recognized the sovereignty of the state based on the people that live in the state, not based on the rights, property rights of the governing families, because until that time, the king was the owner of the state, who owned and granted land to the subjects, the noblemen, and so on. And borders can be moved simply drawing a line on the map. With the Westphalia Treaty, everything was changed, because population are recognized like an entity. So, in some cases, the following step was how I can control. I declare war to another country. I'm a country, I declare war to another country. I win the war. Maybe the war is keep going with the allied of this country. How can control it? Where is my legitimacy? How it can be legitimate to control it? Maybe if I have a strong minority of my people living in the state, I can try to annex it, because there are, say, I have a claim, territorial claim, and I think this is my territory, and but how can I annex people that are different from me? People that speak a different language, have a different culture. Making clear example, if North Korea or South Korea conquers the other part, are all Koreans. But if Italy conquers Slovenia, we cannot govern the Slovenian. They are completely different. They're Slavic people, actually, German Slavic, so it's something very good. Middle case, Hungary declare war and win a war against Romania. They are part of a strong minority of in Romania that have an Hungarian roots, speak Hungarian, but the rest are Romanian. There's very few things to say. So I create a local government under my control that control this territory that everybody knows they don't belong to they don't belong to me. It's a way, let's say, to save the face, to not look bad. It's marketing, political marketing, let's say. But despite always present, the puppet state phenomenon literally proliferated during the two world wars and the period between them, in special association with the dictatorial regime. The dictatorial regime has a passion for this type of states. It's they were I don't know. It's a kind of perfection for this type of government. Almost 20 puppet regimes were created during and immediately after the World War I, including 3 in Ukraine. Just so you can have some, but maybe you know it already if you study the Ukrainian history. But if you don't know it well, I suggest and I would like to push you to study it because it's very interesting. There was an Ukrainian state that was created by the German Empire and governed by Hetman Pavel Petrovich Skoropadsky. I think this he knows. The Crimea regional government, also created by the German Empire, because this is an interesting case because The Crimean create an independent government. Then there was occupied by the Bolshevik. They called the Austrian and the German. The German and the Austrian kicked away the German, the Bolshevik, and they created an independent government that was controlled by them. And then there was the Donetsk Kryvyi Rog Soviet Republic created by the Soviet Russia. 20 in the First World War, around 40 puppet regimes were created immediately and before and during the World War II. The most famous were the Wang Jingwei regime, or reorganized the national government of the Republic of China. This was created by the Japanese. The Japanese were at war with China since 1936, formally or informally. At a certain point in 1938, they conquered Nanking, that was the capital of China. Little note. China was been for century an empire. When the Chinese Republican overthrew the emperor and created the republic, they want to cut any link between the imperial past and the new republic. Therefore, the capital was moved from Peking, Beijing. They were moved to Peking. They moved to Nanjing. The Japanese conquered Nanjing. It was one of the bloodiest action, because aside from the battle, there were horrific war crimes that were committed by the Japanese troops. This is still called the rape of Nanking. And then the Japanese, what they'll do? They create they have contact with some dissident of the national Chinese government that sought to reach, that was possible to reach an agreement with the Japanese after the fall of Nanking. And Japanese invited these people and create a puppet regime in China. Let's say it was a national government, Chinese government, controlled by them. Then the Japanese create also the Menjiang United Autonomous Government. That this now is a government very little known. It was an independent government in what is now Mongolia, close to Mongolia. Is what is called the external Mongolia. That was another Chinese territory. Other creation by the Japanese was the Manchukuo, or Empire of Great Manchuria. As we said before, the Chinese, in beginning of in 1911, declared the republic. The last emperor was a kid. He was taken up aside. The last Chinese dynasty came from the area of Manchuria. Manchuria is the northern part of China, between Korea and Mongolia, and surrounded by Russia. And the Chinese invited the last emperor, whose name was Pui, and he offered him to create a Manchurian kingdom, a Manchurian empire, in what was the original territory of his ancestor, that at the time was occupied by the Japanese. The Japanese acquired control of Manchuria in the first part of the 20th century, after a war with Russia, and after starting to fight wars against China. And this unfortunate guy was so stupid to say yes. And so there was created this other puppet state. Even he, Adolf Hitler, created his own puppet state. He created the Quisling regime or Norwegian national government, the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. When Czechoslovakia was split in part, there was a Slovak, more or less independent state. Then there was a territory that was occupied, Bohemia and Moravia, that were occupied by the Germans, and they became a protectorate, a colony of the Germans. Other government, it was the government of national salvation in Serbia. That's another puppet regime created after the fall of Yugoslavia. Then there was again the Tuvans People Republic. Tuvans People is a state that was created in Siberia by the Soviet Union, and it was independent until 1944, when it was totally controlled by the Soviet Union. Then it was absorbed by Soviet Union. By the way, for curiosity, because this territory was inhabited by the Tuva minority, that the Siberian population, Siberian Mongolian population, the current, one of our nemesis, Shogu, is a Tuvan. Some recent examples of puppet state are the Republic of Crimea during the Balkan Wars in the 90s, and the state of Free Lebanon created by Israel at the end of the 80s as a buffer zone with Lebanon. These are two cases. You know that during the Balkan War, at a certain point, what exploded in Yugoslavia was the desire of the single region of the Yugoslavian Confederation to become independent. The first to be independent was Slovenia. Then there was Croatia. Slovenia was a very homogeneous area according to the ethnic principle, because everybody was Slovenian. Croatia, there are some areas in which there were Serbs, the Krajine, the border with Serbia, and they started a war against the federation. Of course, they want to get to also Slovenia went to war, very short. It lasted for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like this, because the central government don't want them to leave. The real crisis was Bosnia-Herzegovina, because in Bosnia-Herzegovina there were the Bosniak, the Serbs, and the Croats. Bosnia declared independence. Immediately there was a insurrection of the Serbian, the Bosnian Serbia, the Serbians from Bosnia, and they created the Serbian Krajina, Republic of Serbian Krajina, that they were their own independent state, that of course was maneuvered by Belgrade and by Milosevic. Second case was the Free State of Lebanon, when in the 80s, Israel invaded Lebanon. It's the invasion that caused our friends of Organization for the Liberation of Palestine to move from Lebanon to Tunis. In southern Lebanon, some Christian Maronites, Lebanese, decided to help Israel and create a puppet state that was a kind of buffer zone between the Islamists of Lebanon, Hezbollah, to be very, very frankly, and the Israeli territory. It was totally controlled by Israel. There were Israeli troops inside, and it collapsed in 2003 when the Israelis decided to retire, to call back all the troops. It collapsed in I think a week, even 5 days before after the retreat of the retreat of the Israel troop, of the IDF, Israeli Defense Force. Not surprising, the puppet state system had been widely used by Russia during the last 2 decades, creating or supporting puppet regime in any occupied territory belonging to neighboring countries or former USSR territories. I think it was natural and necessary to talk about the current situation that you know very well. We have an example with Donetsk and Lugansk. Then there were the Republic of Abkhazia, the South Ossetia state of Alania, that we created at the expenses of occupying territory of part of the territory of Georgia, and the Pristine Moldavia Republic of Transnistria. Here there was not an occupation, but there is of course a strong support by the Putin regime. Otherwise, they sent them peacekeepers that then became defender. But in any case, Moldavia is not able to deal with the problem of Transnistria. Talking about the state, we have identified some important prerequisites, but we should make other questions regarding what is a state. One point is the recognition by other states. For a state, is a prerequisite to have the recognition of the other state to be considered a state? Question mark. Talking about the state as an international entity, it is a little bit to ask if the recognition by other states could be a prerequisite to be considered as an international law subject. The answer of this question is negative, because the recognition by other states is simply a prerequisite to establish a friendly relation with them. So, the state the recognition is not a prerequisite to be a state, a prerequisite to have a friendly relation with this state. And this has perfect sense, because no one can tell you who you are. You decide by yourself. You can agree with the others how they should call you, but not who you are. In modern times, some unwritten conditions are generally requested by the pre-existing state for a newborn state to have a recognition. The conditions are not to be a menace for international peace and security, to have a government democratically elected, and to respect the human rights. Basically, if you these are the conditions to usually considered. They are only considered to establish friendly relation between states, but we have also to usually also derogated time to time. But if because it's a matter of politics, because this condition is, if you talk about, if you bring everything from the top to the big level, from short level, if you consider a state like a person, let's say that this condition not means the peace and security, have a democratic government, respect the human rights. If you talk about the person, not the state, you would say is to be a decent person, an honest person, more or less. But like in between person, it can be convenient to be friends also, not a decent person, simply because with us is nice, simply because we know him from a long time, simply because it's convenient. And let's say happen to the state. So, for example, it's very difficult to be, I go back to Iran, it's very difficult to be, to consider Iran a decent place, a decent state, with great, I say that with great love for the Iranian people. Nevertheless, there are a lot of countries who recognize Iran. Now, the majority recognize Iran. Even the Vatican recognizes Iran. It's the same between state and people. Like, for example, I don't want to blame anyone, but for a long time, the United States recognized some South America governments that, frankly, they were very difficult to accept under the human rights standards, or even other decency, simple decency standards, human decency. We are talking about states, and we have established the condition for them to be considered what they are and to be considered as a subject, a juridical subject under the international law. But are there any other subject of international law besides the state? There are other subjects of international law. This is something we have to ask. Well, talking about the international law, we have, I think there are other entities that can, or even individuals that can become subjects of international law, or entities and subjects that at least we have to study carefully, that we have to examine under the doctrine principle, to establish, to include or exclude them as a subject of international law and as juridical subjects. These other are the individuals, that can be physical person or even companies, the ethnic minorities or populations, the international organization, and there could be also special type of entities that we see in the future. The individuals, a substantial part of the legal doctrine recognizes a legal personality under the international law to the human individual, considered as a person, to the individual, considered as a person or judicial entities. This doctrine is based on the fact that several international legislative sources and action recognize the legal rights on individuals. So there are international law sources that involve individuals, both physical person, juridical person. And if there are laws about them, probably they are to be considered subject of international law. These legislative sources are the International Convention that oblige the signing state to respect the fundamental human rights. So if I issue a law, no, not a law, sorry, I sign a treaty, I agree a treaty on human rights, and this treaty has influence from the individuals that live in my territory, this implies that these individuals are subject because they are involved in international law. There are second elements that let us think that the individuals are subject of international law is the possibility for this individual to request the judgment of international court if and when the fundamental rights are involved. You think the European Court of Human Rights. I am a citizen of Italy, citizen of the European Union. I can start the case against my nation, my state, if they violate my civil rights, my human rights. Last element, they make us think that individuals can be subject of international law are treaties like the European Union treaties, because this treaty disciplines many aspects of the social and economic relation of the individuals within the member state. Because like this also was also for the United Nations, because they said, but specifically for the European Union, because the European Union dictates the state how to treat the individuals. On the other side, another substantial part of the legal doctrine negates legal personality under the international law to the individuals, considered as a person or judicial entities. As always in doctrine, there is a yes and there is a no. Let's see why some doctrines say no. One of the first strong motives that push some of the doctrine to deny the possibility to consider the individuals as subject of international law is the fact that for example, the European Union treaties are part of special legal system with a very special and distinct section of the international legal system. So this doctrine say, okay, the European Union say discipline how the states should treat the individuals. And from this point you say, okay, the individuals are part. But this is not all the international law. It's common law, the European law is not the general of the international law. It's just a small part. Second argument is that the right and the obligation regarding the individual recognized by the international law system are contained in law and agreements and legal practice addressed to the state and not to the individuals. Therefore, the state should treat the individual according to the standard imposed at this normative source and acts. What is the back thinking? Is I sign a treaty on human rights that involve the individuals. But these treaties is not an agreement in which the individuals are directly involved. It's not signed by them. It's signed between states. The states then, in their own perspective, to have applied these treaties to their own subjects. So there is not a direct contact. It's not like the domestic law, in which the individuals, both like human person or legal entity, are directly touched by the law. So, and this is another count. And in this debate between one part of the doctrine say yes and another part of the doctrine say no, it comes the judicial precedent, the ruling. Because despite the doubts expressed by one part of the doctrine, in 2001, the International Court of Justice recognized the legal personality in the international law also to the individuals. So we have, let's say, the top international court, the International Court of Justice, that since 20 years has recognized to the individuals the capacity to be subject of international law and the legal capacity. Ethnic minorities that we mentioned before. Regarding the ethnic minorities, we can generally exclude them as subject of international law system because they miss all the characteristics requested to the state, both as a community as organization. It's what we said before. We have, for example, we make the example of the courts. The courts are not the state. They are just a minority, and they don't have. They have an organization inside. They control. They have their own state inside Iraq, but this also is not an international entity because it's a regional governing entity who's an entity that exercises its ruling action, its governance action on its limited territory and under control of the national state. The ethnic minorities are a group of individuals that are connected by cultural, religious, and linguistic bonds that in many cases cannot also be determined clearly. Because even inside the minority, they can be different. To make an example, it's even even people that are, for example, the Germans. Germans are Germans because they are organized in a state, but they are Protestant, they are Lutherans, they are Catholics. They have different, slightly different culture. Is very different if they were a minority. I don't think they are a minority, but consider as a population. It's very difficult to keep and consider them something homogeneous. In the best option, the ethnic minority can create, if they are think they are oppressed if they, in the territory when they are an insurgent government or a national liberation movement or committee. But we are in the same situation that we talked before. We talked since the beginning. The National Liberation Committee is not a subject of international law and is not, can be considered as a state, because the state is still the focus. Population. Talking about population, there is not a specific right of the people. Right of the people, right of the population is something that we heard a lot, but it's just a philosophical idea. It's not something connected to legal principle. In the best opinion, the population of people can be considered a synonym of the concept of state, as it is being defined as international principle. If they are, even if they are ethnically homogeneous, in the sense that population is the community established in a certain area and lives under certain rules. This is so is not there is no right of the Italian people. There is a right of the Italian state as international law subject. Talking about people and minority, ethnic minority, we have to introduce a principle that is very important because there are a lot of consequences in both in law and politics. It's the principle of self-determination of the people. The principle of self-determination of the people is a pivotal matter in the international law system because de facto is connected with the concept of people, ethnic minorities, and liberation movements. The principle of self-determination recognizes the right of the people subjected for foreign domination to become independent, being able to freely choose their own political regime or a possible integration with another state. He's one of the engines of the modern politics, and it's pivotal because it's something that is the real base of the last century of history. The principle of self-determination is very present in the international system. Is accepted and codified in United Nations treaties and recognized by the International Court of Justice. According to the content of the principle, the general international law system and rules imposed on a state governing a territory that is not its own to guarantee the principle of self-determination. Basically, according to the principle that codified by the United Nations, if you are unlawfully occupy the territory, you have to free it. You have the people leave free if they're not their subject, is not part of your people. Connection. That's why, in many cases, the puppet states are created. This political and legal marketing operation. In the event of the violation of this principle, the international community may take coercive measure, including sanctions and other, even military measures. Consequently, the violation of the support, consequently of the violation, the support to the movement of the national, for the national liberation can be freely supported by other states. If you occupy unfairly and without reason another territory, and in this territory is developed a national liberation committee or a national liberation movement, I, as a state, the external state, I don't commit any violation if I support this movement, because you are doing something that is unfair and unright. Because on application of the self-determination principle from inside the United Nations Charter, you should let these people free. The principle applies only to people or a fraction of people subjected to foreign domination. Therefore, is a principle of external self-determination. So, this is a very important, very important principle. I can request, I can push for the respect of this principle. So in case of external domination, in case of a state who occupy another territory and unlawfully govern people that are different from his own. Another important principle, that point is that the principle is applicable to the military occupation requested as a support measure by the legitimate government of the state. For example, I'm a national government. I feel myself threatened. I cannot respond properly to the internal struggles or internal menace. I call a foreign allied country to support me with this troop. Even this military occupation done by the foreign troop on my request is considered illegal on the basis of the self-determination principle, or the principle of self-determination of the people. One blatant case of that was the Russian occupation of Afghanistan, of Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. They were called by the national government of Afghanistan, who, by the way, was generated by a coup, not by free election. Despite of that, this was being considered a unlawful military occupation because the Afghan doesn't want to have anything to do with the USSR. But it has specific sense because many cases, a government to call another ally to occupy and control this territory is a puppet state, is not a free state. So de facto is a call that covers a military occupation from a foreign powers. I think that the only case pop in my mind regarding this type of, let's say, a call from a national government for support and aid from a foreign powers to bring to a military occupation of country was, I think, the occupation of Hungary in 1848 when Hungary rebelled to the Austrian, and the Austrian called the Russian army to deal with the rebel because they were not militarily able to get rid of them. But also in this case, let's see, it was at the time was the Emperor of Austria who controlled Hungary. So technically it was again a violation of self-determination principle that didn't even exist. Later, I think I cannot, it's very hard to remember an occupation by foreign military powers without without the puppet states. There was, I think, at Puppetria, there was some example of military occupation, for example, also in the Vietnam Wars. Vietnam has some degree of democracy, some degree of independence, South Vietnam. Cambodia, when it was invaded by, it was a neutral state, and the regime of Prince Sihanouk was replaced by Lon Nol, that was a general, and it's also a puppet state. The principle, I say, is external principle, principle of external self-determination of the people. They were clarified. So I'm a foreigner occupy your territory because there is no international recognition of any internal self-determination principle. That is the right, the people to be governed by a democratically elected government that represents the majority of the citizens. We're talking about unlawful foreign occupation, but a dictatorship, a government with, there is a right, or a government with not elected, but imposed, or not the representative of the people, is under different, it can be under the self-determination principle. It's the internal determination. It's the right to decide with my vote of my destiny and not to have a king or dictator. But unfortunately, this type of principle that could be lawfully it could be seems that something let's say understandable is not being codified. So you cannot you can put sanction on a government that is occupying a foreign territory. You cannot put sanction on the government simply because it was not democratically elected. And also in this, there is a lot of there is a lot of cases in which the government closed an eye on the internal self-determination principle. Some case blatant is it happened in Algeria, where there was in the 90s a democratic government elected, and was in there was a government elected that was after the election was won by an Islamic party, and the army take over the government. The same happened after the Arab Springs in Egypt. The Islamic government won, the parties won the election, and the army again take over the country. There is a very big degree of tolerance for this type of situation, because they are political to recognize the principle of internal self-determination of people. this implies the duty to protect and support the democratically elected government. And this could have a very strong consequence on the political level. It's an interesting case that a measure that was made to preserve the democracy in Turkey, thinking about Turkey, was consisted in an anti-democratic measure, and at the end come out with a kind of creating a strange situation. Turkey has in the Turkey constitution. The Turkey is a laical state; it's not a religious state, and in its constitution is written that there was a duty by the army to protect the laicism of the state, and the army has to intervene to protect the laical state of the not religious involvement of the state. This element of the Turkish constitution was considered illegal and not democratic by the European Union. The Erdogan government takes the chance to cancel it, and now, basically, more or less, Turkey has been controlled for, maybe we are going towards the second decade, if not more, is controlled by an Islamic government, kind of Islamic government. And one of the most advanced democratic states is stepping back in his culture, at least in my personal opinion. So pushing for democracy at that time can be a reverse consequence. The principle of self-determination, as I said, was started came to first created or thought about 1 century and a half ago. The principle of self-determination of the people had its genesis during the First World War and the following peace conference and treaties. One of the main supporters was the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson written a 14-point document that was a base to have the approval for the Congress to start to join the First World War against the Central Power. In this document, he established the post-war rules stating the self-determination principle and the right of the state for several populations. The right of the state because at the time, the Central Empires controlled Germany, controlled part of Poland, Austria controlled Hungary, controlled part of Czech Republic, Croatia, and so on. Despite the 14 points document, the self-determination principle was not completely followed even during the peace conference and the treaties that should be the base, because things always go, there were political reasons. One example was the matter of Western Ukraine. At the peace conference, from the countries that surges from the old empire, there were Poland and there were Ukraine. Actually, there was a war also at the beginning, a short war between Poland and Ukraine. Both they advocate for the area of Lviv and West Ukraine that was before under control of Austria. And because both of them have the claims, because the area was partially inhabited by Polish, partially inhabited by Ukrainian. Same is happened for the Austrian. The Austrian was kind of strange situation because they were take part of the war, but they present themselves at the peace conference, say, okay, we are part of the Austrian Habsburg Empire. We don't want to have anything to do with the Habsburg. We are an independent state, but for the same principle, all the people who speak Hungarian should be under part of our country. And this part was not respected because part of Austria, little, very small part of Austria was given to Czechoslovakian Republic. Considerable part of Hungary was given to Romania. Basically, 30% of the Hungarian-speaking people were not under was not under the Hungarian state. Sorry, I was speaking about Hungarian. Otherwise, we also say that Hungarian control and territories that all belong to them, like Slovenia or Croatia, and this was they rightfully lose it. According to general agreement, the self-determination principle applies only to military occupation situations that happened after the Second World War. Therefore, on the basis of the principle, it is not possible to revert the situation that was where the military conquest or an annexation of territory happened before 1939. This is something that was established because at the time, as you say, at the Versailles Conference and at the Treaty of Versailles, Treaty of Trianon, that were signed by the losing powers or the successors of the losing powers with the winner, there were a lot of problems created. For example, Italy get a part of Austria, the South Tyrol, in which there was an Italian minority, but there was very predominant German-speaking. We get it after the First World War, and technically speaking, for the principle of self-determination, these German-speaking people should be given back to Austria or create their own state. But a lot of years has passed. By now, I tell you, we have a situation that the minority, Austrian minority in Italy, has more rights than the Italians. So they don't want to go with that. They have tax breaks, they have financial support, they have quota of in public administration. If you are not speak German, you cannot be member of the public administration or the police there. So they are perfectly happy. So they don't want to go to Austria. They don't want to absolutely go to Austria. I tell you that some years ago, the Chancellor of Austria proposed to was make a provocative offer to all the Tyroleans. They want to have an Austrian passport. They can get it. No one applied because everybody say, thank you, I'm German speaking, but I stay in Italy and because I have my own advantages. But there are a lot of situations like that. And so there is, like it's a very nice theoretical principle is something that will be applied, but with a certain degree, because we have to be wise with the good intention. We would say more in other situations. Despite of that, also the self-determination of the people apply also to the colonial territories that are right now not anymore. And the United Nations General Assembly has recognized the competence to decide the destiny of this territory according to self-determination and the territorial integrity principle. So basically, on the basis of this principle, the United Nations can decide or have a determined role in the decolonization process, according to self-determination and the territorial integrity principle. The territoriality territorial integrity principle is a principle that was established basically with the Westphalian Treaty. It's not to take pieces of a state, of a single state away. And it was, according to the opinion of the United Nations and the International Court of Justice, and also several experts, there are no conflict between self-determination and territorial integrity. But instead, there are some. The territorial integrity principle gives the right to a state to defend its integrity as a territory and its border, and is also contained in the principle not only established with the Westphalian system, but is also coded in the Article 24 of the United Nations Charter. The key issue of this conflict is the poor application of the self-determination principle without taking consideration of the historical and political context, because this can cause some bizarre situation and domino effects and additional issues. Because a poor application of the self-determination principle can be the antechamber of a secession of a sovereign state with all the connected problems. And also, it can be also used to try to justify territorial claims. One case is, for example, the Kosovo situation, because Kosovo, it was an autonomous territory inside the Yugoslavian Federation, but it was historically a Serbian area. It was the core of the Serbian civilization. Then, to punish the Serbian, the Turks transplanted the Albanian in Kosovo to punish the Serbian. At a certain point, the Albanians, the people from Kosovo, became a majority, and Serbia became a minority. And they want to have their own. They say, oh, we are unlawfully ruled by a foreign powers. We are the majority. Yes, but you understand that why there was a war. Because it's like that a group of, let's say, Spanish was transplanted to Rome. After centuries, they became a majority and say, oh, we want our own Spanish state in Rome. It's like for Italian, take out a part of our heart. Or you can think of the same about the group of Chinese in Kiev. It's something that creates complicated situation. Another case that in which the self-determination it's the case of the can cause a problem or can justify a territorial claim is the case of Falkland Islands. Falkland Islands, there were a war between Argentina and Great Britain. Britain won. The Argentinians say self-determination principle. The Argentinians, they are our integrity, they are our territory. The British, wisely, they make a referendum. 99% of the people from Falkland want to be under the United Kingdom because they are British origin, because they are British. On the other side, the Argentina reply, because you in 1830 expelled all the people of Argentina when you take over the territory. That was technically true. But at the time, I think there were 20, 30 people, 100 people in the islands. And it was 1830, 200 years passed. So it's very complicated matter to deal with. To find the right way, you cannot take a principle like the sovereignty principle, or the sovereignty principle has been the base of the system that we have. Now with the self-determination principle, things are changing in this last century and a half, but we cannot say that it was everything in the last century. Not say that everything was for the best. And you cannot take everything to the extreme. Quickly, the international organization have a juridical personality and capacity to be subject of international law system, and they are also recognized to international organization as this personality is recognized to United Nations, European Union. Both this capacity and juridical personality are mentioned in the treaties and they created this organization. And therefore is automatically recognized by the signer state. And to some of the states that decide to have a relation with these entities. Other special entities that I mentioned before, according to this part of the doctrine, there are other special entities that should be considered subject to international law and granted the personality, juridical personality. One of them is the Catholic Church that can be considered an international law entity in addition to have their own state. One thing is the Vatican State, one thing is the Church. These two complete systems that work on different. Because if a state make an agreement with the local Catholic Church, with the Catholic Church on the management of the religion, of the freedom of religion, of the limit of the religion and inside the country, is not that you make a treaty with the Vatican City. You make a treaty with the Catholic Church. And according part of the doctrine, this type of treaty are considered like international law treaty. Other special entities are some remnants of the past. One interesting case is the Order of the Malta Knight of Malta. The Knight of Malta are still considered by part of the doctrine as an international international law entity, international subject, because the Malta Knight doesn't have was an old hospitalier Knights order. They have a territory until the Napoleonic War. Then they were occupied. They have the Malta as a territory. Then Malta was occupied first by the French, then the British to keep it. But still, they have their passport, they have their institution, and it's an anomalous situation because they are a state without without sovereignty, and actually almost without governance, because even the people who are now Altanized, they have a second passport, they are citizens of a second part. In some way, the Maltanites should be considered as a government in exile, and in this case, they should not receive any subjectivity from the international law, by the international law system. But in any case, as remnants of the past, there are still some considered a Soviet part of the doctrine. I think I keep you half an hour more than was planned, and I thank you for attention, and I hope that also this lesson was interesting.
Thank you so much too. Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.